So I posed this question a few days ago about consciousness embedding itself or effectively taking over a non-conscious or non-organic object, and could that happen, and what were people's impressions of that, and does a consciousness need to be born into a space already inhabiting a body for it to call it that, or can a consciousness non-physically incarnate basically walk in or embed itself into a physical object and go, hey, I'm like a crab and this is my new body? Can that happen? I put that out there for everyone just to have a bit of a contemplate and to talk about before I gave you some context to that, because obviously I had a specific example or thing in my head when I put that out there, but most of the time other people's kind of theories and stories are more interesting than my own, or I find that so I like to ask the question before just sprouting a story. But for your interest, I thought I would just sprout a little bit of that story now. And like most of my good stories, it's very important for you to know that I really want to add an hour more to the story I'm about to tell you, purely for context, but I'm not going to do that. So please just know that a lot of my stories are highly condensed, a bit multi-layered, really just to save time and assuming that you're a very smart person and you're going to get the gist of it anyway. But there's big chunks of this story missing. Please just appreciate that. So a few years ago, when I was going through my ascension process, my process specifically was quite unique in that it went for a finite period of time. It went over a 7-year period, and my complete understanding to the core of my being was that at the end of that 7-year period, I was going to die. I wasn't going to be here physically anymore, and that my transition was going to be complete within this space, in that the I that had always been here my whole life was no longer going to be here. So that was my understanding and context and frame of reference around my own ascension process, and that's how things rolled for me. So as you would imagine, living a 7-year process thinking that you're most likely going to die at the end of that 7 years, things start getting pretty interesting around years 5, 6 and 7 as you're heading into that space. It's a very noisy truck. So around the 6th of my 7th year, I started becoming aware of my soul group, physically and non-physically incarnated, and I always had been aware of my soul group, but I had assumed that they were my guides up until that time, and then I quickly became aware that they were my friends. They weren't just guides or some high-end dudes. We were all same crew. And what I realised is that as my ascension peak progressed, more and more soul crew were coming in into close proximity to me, and that was occurring for several reasons. Some were coming in to provide support, some were coming in to watch and to observe and to witness this process, and others were coming in basically to piggyback, in that, as much as I can explain it, in my ascension, in that my consciousness transitioned from one band to another, there was basically a bit of a travel between an A to B sort of thing, a movement between A and B, and a door opened, and a number of my soul crew chose effectively to go with me and to piggyback the process with me and to ride along through from A to B with me. So about year 6 of year 7, my life had exploded completely. I had lost everybody and everything, and I washed up on the other side of the country and came to, got my shit together, started getting things together, gearing up for the last kind of year or two of my life and of my ascension. And I found myself in a new state in Australia, without a job, without a roof, without anything. And so first step was I bought this car, and it was a little white Corolla. And within a moment, my car's name was Whitey. And everyone names their car. And I like the idea of this thing, right? Because we always name our car and we develop some sort of a personal relationship to our car. And so we might name our car and refer to our car via its name and that sort of stuff. So, I mean, it's not uncommon to name your car. And my little Corolla's name was Whitey. And there we go. So, some interesting things kind of happened as my ascension process really started to gear up. And one of those was, there was a particular hour of the day when things were absolutely peaking for me every single day. And it was between kind of 6 and 8 a.m. You know, it was around this early period of the day. And for a long time, I thought, it's a timing window. Like, there's something about this time of day when downloads are going berserk, my information is going berserk, all the system alterations are going crazy. So I thought it was a time of day. But one day I wasn't going to work for whatever reason, and I realised that my experience was really different. And soon enough, it occurred to me that my experience was related to being in the car, because it wasn't 6 to 8 a.m. The fact is, I was in the car between 6 to 8 a.m. every single day. And the minute I wasn't in the car, I started feeling some difference in my experience of every morning. So I realised the car was a part of it. So something was going on about the physical car and being in the car being either a catalyst or something to do with that aspect of my process. Another really unusual thing that I experienced. I'm a very unusual boy in that I don't give a shit about boy things. Sport can fuck off, cars can fuck off, I don't care about any of that stuff, right? And cars in particular don't interest me. Like, I can drive a car, but it's not my thing, you know? And so kind of car racing and all of that sort of jazz, that's not my thing. But around year 6 in my 7-year ascension process, I developed this utter fascination and connection to muscle cars. And I mean muscle cars, cars that just go, you know, velocity. And that's what it was. It was velocity. And I realized that velocity, as the correct word, was a component of the ascension process as well. And there was something about being in the car as different, that the car was providing me some type of velocity. And that was a component as well, which was different to just wanting to drive fast or liking cars, because neither of those things really worked for me. So over time, in my mornings from 6 to 8, as I'm driving to work, things are downloading, the system is being upgraded, plugs are being rewired, all sorts of stuff is going on, and I'm finding that I'm talking away to Whitey, and talking as in communicating, not just like talking to my car or talking out loud in my car. I mean talking to Whitey and getting communication back and having actual conversations. And of course, the one and almost only topic of conversation in my car, 6 to 8 a.m, was to do with this process. It was to do with my ascension process. And without even me becoming consciously aware of it, Whitey and I were dialoguing, and over several weeks we were starting to dialogue. And one morning I caught it, and I realised that I was dialoguing with a being named Whitey that was connected to my car. And the minute I caught myself in a dialogue scenario, and not just talking out loud like a crazy person by myself, it occurred to me, well, should I say Whitey almost presented himself to me as a conscious independent being, and the conscious independent being that I'd been talking to the whole time, and just didn't make the connection myself that this is an independent being. I'm not just talking in my car. And so in that moment, there was almost like a moment of introduction via us seeing each other as two independent beings. And just like family, you know when someone's family, and in this sense, you know when someone is soul group, you know when someone is soul family. There are certain markers, there's certain indicators for you to know that stuff. And I don't know why I hadn't been seeing Whitey properly that entire time, but the minute I now saw Whitey and we saw each other and we obviously sort of made this introduction, I realised I'm talking to someone in my soul family, like we are soul crew. Seriously, one of my soul crew was my car. Or should I say, one of my soul crew perhaps embedded consciousness or anchored consciousness or projected consciousness onto That physical object being my white Toyota Corolla. But it was in the first person. It wasn't just an association. It wasn't like just talking to myself in the car. I'm talking to the car, like talking to another being, like you would talk to your own guides or your own soul crew. This went on for quite some time. And more after that moment, every time I had an experience, a revelation, a system upgrade, a processing kind of thing going on in the car, Whitey was inherently a part of it, almost like a surgeon in the room, almost like a pair of hands contributing to what was going on. Like once we'd actually seen each other and made some conscious recognition that there were two beings going on here and we're related, it almost opened up permission for Whitey to now step up and to be an active conscious participant and being around me in this process. And so we almost developed a deepening relationship after that, and our dialogue deepened and our dialogue continued as two soul family members. One just happened to be my car. So around this time I'm thinking all sorts of things, because I'm familiar with the idea of a walk-in, but I've never heard of a walk-in in an inanimate object. So I started to think, is it like, does a consciousness embed in the creation process of an inanimate object? Like, is an unborn baby connecting to the car's production in the factory, and that literally as it becomes completed, a consciousness is sort of birthed through that? That's a little bit of a human projection. Mind you, it's all a bit of a human projection, but I'm more thinking that an item is made and a consciousness in non-physical form anchors into the materiality of that, so that there is a co-inhabitation or some sort of a resonance with that item. Because I can tell you, obviously, a member of my soul group is not a car. That's fair call. But I'm telling you, it was a car for me. It worked through this vehicle, it worked through this physical metal item. Because it was with me at all the right times. It was a conscious participant in all sorts of processes going on. And the conclusion, I guess, and the significance of all of it, not just for what it is, but you have to appreciate that for me, I was in a 7-year countdown process to die. And now I'm in year 6, and so I'm fully aware that over the next 12 to 18 months, it is very, very likely that something will happen in my life as a catalyst for death. And what better way than a car? So all of a sudden I start putting 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 together and realise that one of my soul crew has come in with me for the express purpose of walking out with me, walking out as in walking out of the physical environment with me, and this soul group member has conveniently manifest into a vehicle. It's starting to get really clear in my head, and there is becoming little doubt in my mind at some point that I'm probably going to be in a car accident, and that we will leave together via an explosive collision of transformation. Isn't that interesting? There is so much more to this story, leading up to it and certainly following it. There is so much more to this story. And I've written about it all in great detail, and it's all in what I'm publishing next year. But I wanted to just give you a bit of an insight into where I was coming from when I asked that question and put that question to you all, because I have never before and never again experienced or heard of a non-physical consciousness anchoring into and embedding into a non-intelligent physical object, or at least channeling through it. Not necessarily that the consciousness is now a part of that object, but that the consciousness is choosing to channel through that physical object. Because we do that. We draw energy through crystals and all sorts of things, and we can use objects as focus points for channeling. So I think that's what I've concluded in that particular soul family member for me used that vehicle, and that was the perfect conducive item, I guess, for us to communicate. Not that Whitey was the car, but Whitey was working through the car. I'm sure that makes a bit of sense to you guys. I hope that's interesting. I hope that hasn't bored you senseless. If it has provoked a million more questions or whatever, ask away. And I like this topic, as I like all the topics we bang on about. So we can keep chatting a bit more about this if you like, and the nature of consciousness and stuff.